I was staring at the certified letter in my hand when I realized the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association was actually trying to take my family's hunting lodge over unpaid fines for snow removal violations. The letter claimed I owed them $47,000 in accumulated fines, interest, and legal fees, and they were filing a lien to seize the property within 30 days. My name is Xavier Fontaine, and I inherited that lodge from my grandfather 3 years ago. It sits on 200 acres of pristine Montana wilderness just outside of Whitefish, overlooking Flathead Lake with the Mission Mountains rising in the distance. My grandfather built it in 1978 with his own 2 hands, and I spent every childhood summer there learning to fish, hunt, and appreciate the silence that only exists miles away from civilization. The problem started 6 months ago when a developer bought up land around the lodge and created Pine Ridge Estates, a gated community of luxury vacation homes for wealthy out-of-state buyers. They formed an HOA and somehow decided my property fell under their jurisdiction, even though my lodge predated their entire development by over 40 years. I called my attorney, Marcus Wright, the moment I finished reading the letter. He had helped me with the estate paperwork when Grandpa died, so he knew the property's history. "Marcus, they're trying to take the lodge," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Slow down, Xavier. Who's trying to take what?" "The Pine Ridge HOA. They're claiming I owe them $47,000 for snow removal violations, and they're filing a foreclosure lien." There was a pause on the other end. "That's impossible. Your property isn't part of their development. You're not a member of their HOA." That's what I thought, but this letter looks pretty official. It's got a law firm's letterhead and everything. "Hutchins, Bradley, and Stone out of Kalispell. Send me everything you've got. I'll look into it immediately." I scanned the documents and emailed them while we were still on the phone. I could hear him typing on his computer, pulling up files. "Okay, I'm looking at the property records now," Marcus said. "Your lodge is definitely not part of Pine Ridge Estates. The development boundaries are clearly marked, and your grandfather's original deed shows your property is completely separate. So how can they do this? They can't. Legally. But that doesn't mean they won't try. These HOA boards sometimes get power drunk and overstep their authority. The question is why their attorney would go along with something this obviously fraudulent. That question bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Hutchins, Bradley, and Stone was a respected firm. Why would they risk their reputation on something so clearly illegal? 2 days later, I got my answer when I drove up to the lodge to check on things. It was early March, and Montana was still deep in winter. The road to the lodge was a private drive that wound through national forest land under an access easement my grandfather had secured decades ago. As I rounded the final bend, I saw a massive metal gate blocking the road about a quarter-mile from my property. I parked and got out, my boots crunching in the snow. The gate was new, probably installed within the last week. A sign read, "Pine Ridge Estates Private Property No Trespassing." A smaller sign below it listed the HOA's rules and regulations. My phone had no service out here, so I couldn't call Marcus immediately. Instead, I walked around the gate and hiked the rest of the way to the lodge. The place looked exactly as I'd left it 6 weeks ago during my last visit. The logs were weathered but solid, the metal roof was intact, and my grandfather's hand-carved sign still hung over the door. Fontaine Lodge ESD, 1978. I went inside and started a fire in the stone fireplace to take the chill off. While the place warmed up, I walked the property boundaries. That's when I noticed the stakes. Every 100 yards or so, someone had driven in bright orange survey stakes with numbers on them. They weren't there during my Christmas visit. Back at the lodge, I used the satellite phone I kept for emergencies and called Marcus. "They've blocked the access road with a gate," I told him. "They did what? Put up a gate across the Forest Service road. Claims it's private property for Pine Ridge Estates. That's a public easement road. They absolutely cannot do that. Xavier, something bigger is going on here. I've been digging into the HOA's formation documents and property records. Can you come to my office tomorrow? There's something you need to see. I'll be there at 9. I spent that night at the lodge, like I always did when I visited. The silence of the Montana wilderness was therapeutic after the noise of my life in Seattle, where I worked as a software engineer. I'd been considering moving out here permanently, maybe doing remote work from the lodge. The pandemic had proven that was viable. But these HOA troubles were threatening that dream. The next morning, I hiked back to my truck, drove around the gate through a section of forest I knew was navigable, and headed to Kalispell. Marcus's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of place that felt like law offices were supposed to feel, with dark wood and leather furniture. "Coffee," he offered as I walked in. "Definitely." He poured 2 cups and gestured to the conference table, which was covered in documents, maps, and printouts. "I spent yesterday at the county recorder's office," Marcus began. "Xavier, the Pine Ridge HOA has been extremely busy. Look at this." He spread out a large survey map showing my property and the surrounding area. The Pine Ridge Estates development was clearly marked to the south and west of my land, but someone had drawn new boundary lines that encompassed my property. "This is the original plat for Pine Ridge Estates," he said, pointing to one document. "Filed 2 years ago. Your property is clearly outside their boundaries. But look at this amended plat filed 6 weeks ago." The amended version showed boundary lines that had shifted north and east, now including my 200 acres. "They can't just redraw boundary lines to include property they don't own," I said. "No, they can't. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at who signed off on the amended plat." He pointed to a signature at the bottom of the document. "County Commissioner Harold Vance." "Vance has a vacation home in Pine Ridge Estates," Marcus continued. "He's also on the HOA board. This is corruption, pure and simple. They're using his position to manipulate property records. Can we stop this? We can and we will. But it gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. I started researching the development's original formation documents, trying to understand how they thought they could get away with this. That's when I found something fascinating about your property's history." Marcus pulled out a thick folder of yellowed documents. "When your grandfather bought this land in 1976, it was part of a larger parcel being sold by a timber company. The timber company, Mountain West Logging, was liquidating assets. Your grandfather bought 200 acres, but here's what I found in the archived records at the state level." He laid out a deed from 1967. Mountain West Logging acquired their holdings through a complex series of transactions dating back to the original territorial land grants in the 1880s. When Montana achieved statehood, a lot of the territorial grants were consolidated under what they called master deeds. These documents essentially established the foundational ownership and usage rights for large sections of land. "Okay," I said, not quite seeing where this was going. "Your grandfather didn't just buy 200 acres, Xavier. He bought the master deed for the entire original parcel. That's over 5,000 acres, including all of what is now Pine Ridge Estates." The coffee in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you don't just own your lodge and 200 acres. You hold the master deed to the entire region. The developers who created Pine Ridge Estates should have traced the title all the way back and obtained a release from the master deed holder. But the master deed wasn't properly indexed in the modern computer system when the county digitized their records in the 1990s. It's still valid, but it's buried in the archives. So I own Pine Ridge Estates. Not exactly. The individual homeowners own their properties, but their deeds are subordinate to your master deed. You have certain rights and authorities over the entire parcel that supersede the HOA's authority. Essentially, they can't enforce any rules or regulations without your approval as the master deed holder, and they definitely can't seize your property or block your access. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. This is going to get ugly, isn't it? Probably. But you're holding all the cards. They just don't know it yet. Marcus filed an emergency motion with the district court to block the foreclosure action and remove the gate blocking my access. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, he sent a formal letter to the HOA board and their attorney informing them of the master deed situation and demanding they cease all actions against my property. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Fontaine, this is Brenda Patterson, president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association." Her voice had that particular quality of someone used to being obeyed, sharp, clipped, and utterly confident. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Patterson?" "I'm calling to discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding regarding your property. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to resolve this amicably." "Misunderstanding? You're trying to seize my family's property over fabricated violations." "Mr. Fontaine, your property has been in violation of our snow removal policies since December. We have standards to maintain in Pine Ridge Estates. Your negligence affects all of our property values. My property isn't part of Pine Ridge Estates. According to our amended plat maps, filed with the county and fully approved, your property falls within our jurisdiction. We've been more than patient, but the accumulated fines and fees must be addressed. Mrs. Patterson, has your attorney informed you about the master deed?" There was a pause. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Either she was lying or her attorney hadn't told her. I suspected the latter. "I suggest you speak with your legal counsel. I'll see you at the hearing next week." I hung up before she could respond. The following days were tense. I drove back up to the lodge and found the gate had been reinforced with a chain and padlock. Someone had also posted no trespassing signs along what they claimed were the new boundaries of Pine Ridge Estates. I took photos of everything and sent them to Marcus. "They're escalating," he said when I called. "That's actually good for us. Every illegal action they take strengthens our case. It doesn't feel good. I can't access my own property without hiking through the woods. One more week, Xavier, then we'll settle this in court." That weekend, I got another surprise. I was at my apartment in Seattle when someone knocked on my door Sunday morning. I opened it to find a process server with another stack of legal documents. The HOA was now suing me personally for harassment, defamation, and interfering with their governance. They claimed my false allegations about the master deed were causing distress to the board members and undermining the community's stability. They were seeking $200,000 in damages. I called Marcus immediately, even though it was Sunday. "They're panicking," he said after I read him the filing. "This is a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to intimidate you into backing down by burying you in legal fees and procedural nightmares. Will it work? Not even slightly. If anything, this makes their corruption more obvious. A legitimate HOA doesn't file retaliatory lawsuits when someone challenges their authority with documented evidence. This shows consciousness of guilt. So, what do? We go to court on Thursday as planned, we present the master deed, and we watch them fall apart. Bring everything your grandfather left you. Every document, every deed, every piece of paper related to the property. We're going to need all of it. I spent the next 3 days going through boxes I'd stored in my apartment after settling Grandpa's estate. Most of it was sentimental stuff, photos, his old hunting journals, letters. But there was also a metal filing box I'd never opened. Inside, I found all the original documents from the property purchase in 1976. There were letters between Grandpa and the timber company's attorney, negotiating the sale. There were surveys and maps, and there, at the bottom of the box, was the master deed. It was a heavy document, printed on thick paper that had yellowed with age, but the text was still clear. It described the original 5,000-acre parcel and designated my grandfather, Robert Fontaine, as the master deed holder with all attendant rights and privileges. I photographed every page and sent them to Marcus, then packed the originals carefully for the trip to Montana. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I drove from Whitefish to the Flathead County Courthouse in Kalispell, arriving an hour early. Marcus was already there, looking confident in a dark suit. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." We went through security and headed to the courtroom on the 3rd floor. The HOA's attorney, Richard Hutchins himself, was already there with 3 of his associates. Sitting behind them were 5 people I assumed were the HOA board members. Brenda Patterson was easy to identify. She was probably in her mid-50s, with severe features, and the kind of haircut that probably had a specific name in whatever expensive salon she frequented. She wore a navy blue pantsuit that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." 2 of the other board members were men in their 60s, retired executive types. The 4th was a younger woman, maybe 40, who looked uncomfortable being there. The 5th was County Commissioner Harold Vance, looking very nervous. Judge Helen Morrison took the bench promptly at 9. She was known as a no-nonsense judge who didn't tolerate games in her courtroom. "Good morning, counsel. This is an emergency hearing on the motion filed by Xavier Fontaine to halt foreclosure proceedings and remove an allegedly illegal access barrier. Mr. Wright, you filed the motion. You may proceed." Marcus stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about a brazen attempt by the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association to seize property they have no authority over. Property that has been in the Fontaine family for nearly 50 years. The HOA has manufactured violations, filed fraudulent amended plat maps, physically blocked my client's legal access to his property, and initiated foreclosure proceedings. All of this is not only illegal, but appears to be part of a coordinated effort involving corruption at the county level." Richard Hutchins jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, those are serious allegations made without evidence. The Pine Ridge HOA has followed all proper procedures regarding Mr. Fontaine's property, which falls clearly within their jurisdiction according to properly filed and approved plat maps." "We'll get to the evidence in a moment," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Wright, you mentioned corruption at the county level. That's a serious charge." "Yes, Your Honor." County Commissioner Harold Vance, who is present in this courtroom as a member of the HOA board, used his official position to approve fraudulent amended plat maps that incorporated my client's property into the HOA's jurisdiction without legal authority. This is documented in the county records. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. She looked directly at Vance, who seemed to shrink in his seat. "Commissioner Vance, You're a member of this HOA board. Vance stood awkwardly. Yes, Your Honor, but I recuse myself from any official county business regarding Pine Ridge Estates. Except you signed off on the amended plat maps in your official capacity as county commissioner, Marcus said, holding up a document. Your signature is right here. That was a routine approval. I didn't realize. Sit down, Commissioner, Judge Morrison said coldly. We'll address your involvement shortly. Mr. Hutchins, I'm troubled by these allegations. What's your response? Hutchins looked less confident now. Your Honor, the amended plat maps were properly filed and approved through the normal county process. If there was any irregularity in that process, my clients were unaware of it. They relied on the official county records showing Mr. Fontaine's property within their jurisdiction. Even though Mr. Fontaine's deed predates your client's development by over 40 years. Property boundaries can be complex, Your Honor. We believed in good faith that the amended plat maps were accurate. Mr. Wright, you mentioned you have evidence regarding the property's ownership history. Yes, Your Honor, extensive evidence. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus walked the court through the entire history. He presented Grandpa's original purchase documents from 1976, the timber company's liquidation papers, and then, finally, the master deed from 1967. I watched Brenda Patterson's face as Marcus explained what the master deed meant. Her confidence evaporated, replaced by confusion and then dawning horror. So to be clear, Judge Morrison said, Mr. Fontaine holds the master deed for the entire 5,000-acre parcel that includes all of Pine Ridge Estates. Correct, Your Honor. The master deed predates any of the subsequent divisions of the property. While the individual homeowners in Pine Ridge Estates have valid deeds to their specific properties, those deeds are subordinate to the master deed. The HOA has no authority to enforce any rules or regulations without the master deed holder's consent. They certainly have no authority to seize the master deed holder's property. Hutchins was frantically conferring with his associates, flipping through documents. Your Honor, I request a recess to review this new information. New information? Judge Morrison's voice could have frozen water. Mr. Hutchins, the master deed is a matter of public record. Your firm should have conducted a thorough title search before initiating foreclosure proceedings against any property, much less one that predates your client's development by 4 decades. This is basic due diligence. Your Honor, the master deed wasn't properly indexed in the county's digital system. It was an understandable oversight. An oversight that led your clients to attempt to seize property illegally, file fraudulent plat maps with the help of a corrupt county commissioner, and physically block access to private property. That's not an oversight, Mr. Hutchins. That's a pattern of illegal conduct. Brenda Patterson stood up. Your Honor, may I address the court? Mrs. Patterson, you're not an attorney. Sit down and let your counsel speak for you. But we didn't know about any master deed. This is all news to us, Mrs. Patterson. I strongly suggest you listen to your attorney and remain silent. Marcus stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to address Mrs. Patterson's claim of ignorance. We sent a formal letter to the HOA board and their counsel 5 days ago, informing them of the master deed and demanding they cease their illegal actions. Not only did they ignore that letter, but they escalated their harassment by filing a retaliatory slap suit against my client. They also reinforced the illegal gate blocking his property access. These are not the actions of people operating in good faith. Judge Morrison looked at Hutchins. Is this true? You were informed about the master deed 5 days ago and proceeded anyway. Hutchins looked pale. Your Honor, we believed it was a negotiating tactic. We didn't think the master deed was legitimate. Based on what? Did you conduct any research? Did you check the archives? Or did you simply assume your clients were right because they wanted to be? The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison flipped through the documents in front of her, taking her time. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. Here's what I see. I see an HOA that overstepped its authority, filed fraudulent documents with the county's help, illegally blocked access to private property, initiated baseless foreclosure proceedings, and filed a retaliatory lawsuit when challenged. I see an attorney who failed to conduct basic due diligence before pursuing legal action, and I see a county commissioner who abused his official position to benefit an organization he was personally involved with. She pointed at Hutchins. The foreclosure proceedings are dismissed with prejudice. The gate will be removed from Mr. Fontaine's access road within 24 hours, or the HOA board members will be held in contempt. The SLAPP suit filed against Mr. Fontaine is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am awarding Mr. Fontaine his attorney's fees and costs. Your Honor, Brenda Patterson started. I'm not finished. Mrs. Patterson, you and your board attempted to steal a man's property through legal manipulation and corruption. You're fortunate I don't have criminal jurisdiction because what you've done crosses the line into fraud. I am referring this matter to the Montana Attorney General's office for investigation of possible criminal charges. I'm also referring Commissioner Vance to the appropriate authorities for investigation of corruption and abuse of office. Vance looked like he might pass out. As for the master deed, Judge Morrison continued, I am declaring that Xavier Fontaine is the rightful holder of the master deed for the original 5,000-acre parcel, including all of what is now Pine Ridge Estates. The HOA has no authority to enforce any rules, regulations, or restrictions within that territory without Mr. Fontaine's explicit written consent. Any actions taken by the HOA prior to this ruling are void. Any fines, fees, or assessments levied against Mr. Fontaine are canceled, and the HOA is ordered to reimburse him any amounts already paid, if applicable. I hadn't paid them anything, but the point was made. Mr. Fontaine, Judge Morrison said, looking directly at me, I want to be clear about what this ruling means. You now have legal authority over the HOA's operations within the master deed territory. The individual homeowners still own their properties, but the HOA's governance is subject to your oversight as master deed holder. You may want to consult with your attorney about how to proceed. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. Marcus and I gathered our documents while the HOA board sat in shock. Brenda Patterson was arguing with Hutchins in a furious whisper. Vance had his head in his hands. As we headed for the door, Patterson intercepted us in the hallway. This isn't over, she hissed. You can't just take over our community. We have rights. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus said calmly, I suggest you consult with new legal counsel before you say anything else that could be used against you in the criminal investigation. Her face went red. Criminal investigation. We didn't do anything criminal. You attempted to seize property through fraud. You filed false documents with the county. You conspired with a public official to manipulate government records. Those are crimes, Mrs. Patterson. Serious crimes. If I were you, I'd be looking for a good criminal defense attorney, not picking fights in courthouse hallways. We left her standing there, speechless for probably the first time in her life. Outside, Marcus and I stood on the courthouse steps in the cold March air. What happens now? I asked. Now you decide what you want to do. You have complete authority over that HOA. You could dissolve it entirely if you wanted. You could restructure it. You could let it continue operating but with oversight. It's entirely up to you. What about the criminal investigation? That's out of our hands. The Attorney General will decide whether to pursue charges. Based on what we've seen, I'd be surprised if they don't. This is pretty clear-cut fraud and corruption. We walked to a coffee shop downtown to decompress and discuss next steps. My phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. I ignored them. The homeowners are going to panic, Marcus said over coffee. Once word gets out about the master deed, they're going to worry that their properties are in jeopardy. You should consider issuing some kind of statement reassuring them that you're not going to interfere with their ownership rights. I don't want their properties, I just want my lodge. I know, but they don't know that. The HOA board is probably spreading all kinds of misinformation right now, trying to rally the homeowners against you. He was right. By that evening, my email was flooded with messages from Pine Ridge Estates residents. Most were panicked, asking what the ruling meant for their homes. Some were angry, accusing me of trying to steal their properties. A few were apologetic, saying they'd had no idea what the board was doing. Marcus helped me draft a response that we sent to every Pine Ridge Estates homeowner we could identify. To the residents of Pine Ridge Estates, I am writing to address concerns about today's court ruling. I want to be absolutely clear. I have no interest in interfering with your property ownership. Your homes are yours. The court's ruling simply established that I hold the master deed for the original land parcel, which gives me oversight authority regarding HOA governance in the area. I did not ask for this authority and had no idea it existed until recently, when the HOA began illegal proceedings against my family's property. I discovered the master deed while defending myself against the HOA's attempted seizure of my land. My only goal was, and is, to protect my family's lodge. However, given the court's ruling, I feel obligated to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. I will be working with legal counsel to restructure the HOA's governance to prevent future abuses of power. If you have questions or concerns, please feel free to contact my attorney, Marcus Wright, at the information below. Sincerely, Xavier Fontaine. The next few days were chaotic. The local news picked up the story and it spread quickly. HOA attempts property seizure. Discovers homeowner holds master deed, was the headline in the Whitefish Pilot. The story hit regional news stations, and then national legal blogs started covering it as an example of HOA overreach. Brenda Patterson gave an interview claiming she was the victim of a legal technicality and that I was trying to take over their community. The backlash from the actual homeowners was swift. It turned out that Patterson had made a lot of enemies during her time as HOA president. People started sharing their own stories of her aggressive enforcement tactics, arbitrary fines, and bullying behavior. An online petition started circulating demanding the resignation of the entire HOA board. It got 300 signatures in 2 days, representing most of the homes in Pine Ridge Estates. Meanwhile, Marcus and I made a trip up to the lodge to document the damage from the access blockage. The gate had been removed as ordered, but we found other issues. Someone had dumped trash on my property near the road. Survey stakes had been driven into areas near the lodge itself. There was evidence that people had been on my property without permission, probably the HOA conducting their inspections, to document the violations they'd invented. We documented everything with photos and timestamps. A week after the hearing, I got a call from an attorney named Sandra Monroe. She represented a group of Pine Ridge Estates homeowners who wanted to meet with me. My clients are concerned about the future of their community, she explained. They want to apologize for the board's actions and discuss how to move forward constructively. I'm willing to meet. We arranged a gathering at the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse the following Saturday. Marcus advised me to be cautious but open-minded. These people are victims too, he said. The board was acting without proper oversight or accountability. Most HOAs operate that way, actually. It's a systemic problem. This is your chance to do something different. Saturday morning, I drove up to Pine Ridge Estates for the first time since the court ruling. The development was beautiful, I had to admit. Upscale mountain homes with huge windows overlooking the valley, carefully maintained landscaping, winding streets with names like Glacier View Drive and Mountain Crest Lane. My grandfather would have hated it, all this luxury development in what used to be wilderness, but I understood why people wanted to live here. The clubhouse was a timber frame building with a great room that could hold about 100 people. It was packed when I arrived. Sandra Monroe met me at the door. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Fontaine. I think you'll find this group is very different from the board." She introduced me to several homeowners who'd organized the meeting. There was Tom Reeves, a retired teacher from Oregon. Janet Kim, a doctor from California who used her Pine Ridge house as a vacation home. Derek Sullivan, a software executive from Texas. They all seemed reasonable, genuinely concerned about what had happened. Sandra called the meeting to order, and I stood at the front of the room facing dozens of anxious faces. "First," I said, "I want to make something clear. I'm not here to take your homes or disrupt your lives. I inherited my grandfather's lodge and I want to preserve it and continue his legacy. That's all I've ever wanted. The master deed situation is not something I sought out. I only discovered it while defending myself against the board's illegal actions." There were nods and murmurs of understanding. "That said," I continued, "the court's ruling gives me legal authority over HOA governance in this area. I take that responsibility seriously. What the board tried to do to me could have been done to any of you. In fact, based on the stories I've heard this past week, the board has been abusing its authority for some time. Brenda Patterson fined me $5,000 because my contractor's truck was parked in my driveway overnight during a kitchen renovation," someone called out. She said commercial vehicles weren't allowed, even temporarily. She tried to force me to repaint my house because she didn't like the shade of green I chose, another person added. It was on the approved color list, but she said it was too bright. More stories poured out. The board had been tyrannical, using fines and threats to enforce petty preferences that went beyond any reasonable governance. They'd accumulated a war chest of over $200,000 in fines and fees, which they'd spent on questionable projects like the elaborate entrance gate and the clubhouse renovations, none of which had been approved by the general membership. "I think we need a complete restructuring," I said. "New board, new bylaws, real accountability and oversight. Marcus, my attorney, can help draft new governance documents that protect homeowners' rights while maintaining reasonable community standards. Would you serve on the new board?" Janet Kim asked. "No, this isn't my community. I don't live here, but I'll approve the new structure and bylaws to ensure they are fair. And as master deed holder, I'll maintain oversight authority to prevent future abuses. Think of it as a constitutional check on HOA power." Tom Reeves stood up. "Mr. Fontaine, speaking for myself and I think many others here, we appreciate your reasonableness. Frankly, after what the board tried to do to you, you'd be justified in dissolving the HOA entirely and leaving us to figure things out ourselves. The fact that you're willing to help us create something better says a lot about your character." There was applause. I felt embarrassed but also relieved. These were good people who'd been poorly served by their leadership. We spent the next 2 hours discussing ideas for restructuring. Marcus took notes on his laptop. The consensus was to reduce the board's power significantly, require membership votes for any fines over $500, establish clear appeal processes for violations, and require financial transparency with quarterly reports to all homeowners. Someone suggested that any rule changes should require approval not just from the board but from me as master deed holder, creating a 2-tiered approval system that would prevent unilateral power grabs. "I'll agree to that," I said, "but I want it to be a passive role. If the board proposes rule changes, they get sent to me for review. If I don't object within 30 days, they're automatically approved. I'll only actively intervene if something seems unreasonable or illegal. I'm not trying to micromanage your community." By the end of the meeting, we had a framework for moving forward. Sandra Monroe agreed to work with Marcus to draft new governing documents. The homeowners voted unanimously to demand the current board's resignation and to hold elections for a new board within 60 days. As people filed out, several came up to thank me personally. One elderly woman hugged me and said, "Your grandfather would be proud of how you handled this." I hoped she was right. The following week brought unexpected developments. The Montana Attorney General's office announced they were opening a formal investigation into the Pine Ridge HOA board and County Commissioner Vance. 2 investigators from the AG's office interviewed me and Marcus, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the documents we'd uncovered. "This is a significant case," one of the investigators told us. "We've seen HOA corruption before, but usually it's financial fraud, board members embezzling funds or taking kickbacks from contractors. This is more sophisticated. Using a county official's position to manipulate property records for the HOA's benefit, that's conspiracy and abuse of office. If we can prove Vance knew the amended plat maps were fraudulent, he's looking at felony charges." They also investigated Hutchins, Bradley, and Stone for their role. While it appeared that Richard Hutchins had been negligent rather than actively fraudulent, the firm was facing serious professional consequences. Several clients had already left, and the Montana State Bar had opened an ethics investigation. 2 weeks after our community meeting, Brenda Patterson, Harold Vance, and the 3 other board members were arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and attempting to obtain property under false pretenses. The perp walk photos made the front page of the Daily Interlake. Patterson's smug expression was gone, replaced by shock and fear. I didn't take pleasure in seeing them arrested, but I felt vindicated. What they'd tried to do was criminal, and they were being held accountable. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. I stayed in Seattle for most of that time, working my regular job and following the case through updates from Marcus and news reports. The discovery process revealed even more misconduct. The board had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, including Patterson's business trips to luxury resorts. They'd been taking kickbacks from contractors who worked on community projects. The snow removal violations they'd charged me with were completely fabricated. They'd never even conducted the inspections they claimed to have done. The motive became clear during the investigation. Patterson and Vance had been working with a developer who wanted to buy my property for a luxury resort expansion. The developer had offered them a substantial finder's fee if they could acquire the land. The whole scheme had been about forcing me out so they could flip the property for a profit. The developer, unsurprisingly, disappeared from the picture once the investigation started. He claimed he'd had no idea about the illegal tactics and had simply made a legitimate offer to purchase land. Technically, Making an offer wasn't illegal, but the timing was suspicious. The AG's office couldn't prove he'd been part of the conspiracy, so he escaped charges. By July, the legal dust had settled. Patterson, Vance, and 2 of the other board members accepted plea deals to avoid trial. They pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received sentences ranging from probation to 6 months in jail, plus significant fines and restitution. The 5th board member, a man named Charles Winters, had apparently been a reluctant participant who'd objected to the scheme. He testified against the others and received immunity. Pine Ridge Estates held elections for a new board in August. The new leadership was younger, more diverse, and seemed genuinely committed to serving the community rather than ruling it. Tom Reeves was elected president. Janet Kim became treasurer. They quickly implemented the reforms we discussed, and Marcus helped them finalize new bylaws that I approved as master deed holder. The new bylaws included provisions protecting property owners from arbitrary fines, requiring transparency in HOA finances, and establishing my oversight role as a check against future board overreach. It was actually an innovative governance structure that attracted attention from legal scholars studying HOA reform. I visited the lodge regularly throughout that summer and fall. With the access issues resolved and the HOA no longer harassing me, I could finally enjoy the property the way Grandpa had intended. I spent weekends there, hiking, fishing, and working on minor repairs to keep the old place in good shape. In September, something unexpected happened. Derek Sullivan, one of the Pine Ridge homeowners I'd met at the community meeting, knocked on my lodge door one Saturday morning. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I was hiking and saw your truck. Thought I'd stop by." We talked for a while on the porch looking out at the mountains. Derek was a good guy, and we discovered we had a lot in common. He'd also grown up visiting Montana, and he'd bought his Pine Ridge house to recapture some of that nostalgia. "A few of us have been talking," Derek said. "The new board wants to establish a better relationship with you. Not just legally, but as neighbors. We were thinking about inviting you to community events, getting to know you beyond all the legal drama." "I'd like that," I said. Over the following months, I did become more involved with the Pine Ridge Estates community. Not in governance, just as a neighbor. I attended a few of their social events, helped with a community cleanup day, and even hosted a small group for a fishing trip on Flathead Lake. It was nice to see the development not as a threat to my grandfather's wilderness legacy, but as a different way people were connecting with the same landscapes I loved. By December, almost a year after the whole nightmare started, things had stabilized into a new normal. The lodge was peaceful. The HOA was functioning properly under new leadership. The legal issues were resolved. I started seriously planning my move from Seattle to Montana, working with my employer to transition to full-time remote work. On Christmas Eve, I stood on the lodge's porch watching snow fall over the mountains, just like I'd done as a kid with Grandpa. The world felt right. The old lodge had survived not just weather and time, but also human greed and corruption. It would still be here for another generation, and another after that. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Merry Christmas. By the way, got a call from a law professor at University of Montana. Wants to write a case study about the master deed situation for an academic journal." Interested in being interviewed? I smiled. Why not? If our experience could help reform HOA governance more broadly, that would be a worthy legacy. I texted back. "Sure, happy to help, and thanks for everything this year. You saved my family's home." His response came quickly. "You saved it." "I just did the paperwork. Enjoy the holiday." I put the phone away and went back inside to stoke the fire. The lodge was warm and solid, filled with decades of family memories and ready for decades more. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched away in all directions, beautiful and indifferent and eternal. The HOA had tried to take this from me, tried to erase my family's history for their own profit. They'd failed not just because of the legal technicality of the master deed, but because they'd underestimated how far someone will go to protect what matters. This lodge mattered. The land mattered. The connection to my grandfather and to this wild place mattered more than any amount of money or legal intimidation. I settled into Grandpa's old armchair by the fire with a book and a glass of whiskey, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of burning wood. This was what he'd built the lodge for. This peace, this connection to something older and bigger than ourselves. No HOA, no matter how power-hungry or corrupt, could take that away. The fire burned low as night fell completely. I added another log and watched the flames climb, thinking about the year that had passed. The certified letter that started it all seemed like ancient history now. So much had changed. A corrupt HOA board was gone, facing the consequences of their crimes. A county commissioner had lost his position and his freedom. A community had learned hard lessons about accountability and governance. And I discovered I held a master deed I never knew existed, giving me authority I'd never wanted but had learned to use responsibly. Most importantly, the lodge was safe. That was what mattered. As I finally headed to bed that night, I paused at the framed photo of Grandpa that hung in the hallway. It showed him standing in front of the lodge the year he'd finished building it, weathered hands on his hips, proud smile on his face. "We made it through another year," I told the photo, "and we're going to make it through a lot more." Outside, the snow continued falling on the Montana mountains, covering everything in pristine white, the same as it had for thousands of years before the lodge existed, and would for thousands more after. Some things were bigger than property disputes and legal battles. Some things endured. The lodge would endure. I'd make sure of it.